start, I'm going to take off this wheel, 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts. And remove the wheel. Now with the wheel off, we have clear access to this tensioner. With a 14mm wrench, I'm going to loosen up this nut. Don't take it off yet, just loosen it up. And that's going to allow the tensioning, that's going to allow the adjuster bolt to move freely up and down. I'm just going to leave that like this. Now let's go up top and relieve tension. Now coming from the top of the engine, right down here, you'll see that, which is basically just a long hollow nut. And that's what is going to adjust your tensioner with a 14mm socket and a swivel. You're going to want to tighten that. Tightening this will actually pull the adjuster up. Now with tension loosened off the tensioner, we can pop the belt off. Just slide it off of the tensioner pulley. There we go. And you can remove the belt from the vehicle. Now let's finish removing this nut and remove the tensioner pulley. Remove this nut fully, and then we'll take the pulley off. Perfect. You want to save this spacer here because that's what you're going to use on the new tensioner assembly to put it on and space the pulley out from the bracket here. That way it lines up with all the rest of the pulleys. Remove this bracket off of the engine. 3 12mm bolts. I'm going to start with the top one, but it doesn't matter where you want to start. Okay, that's the top one. Let's do the same to the other 2. Okay, let's remove the bottom 2 bolts. Now let's remove the bracket from the vehicle. Okay, let's remove everything from our old tensioner and the bracket. So this just pulls right out. Remove this washer and remove this old piece, set those aside. Now you want to take your new tensioner, which you'll have to disassemble to get through that bracket. So remove this nut and pay attention to all the washers that are here because there are several. There's this smaller one, then there's this big one, and then there's another small one. These are all here for a purpose. So put them back exactly the way they came apart. Remove the pulley, remove this spacer, and finally remove this stud. Put this through like that. Make sure the slot that's cut out on the stud matches this cutout. I'm going to start in this adjuster nut up top. Before this loop goes over, slide on a washer. Now hook this on. Then we put on this spacer, and at this point we can install it like this. You don't want to put on the pulley yet because otherwise it hides your bolts. So this is where we can stop for now, and then in the car we'll have to put all these back together where they belong. Okay, hold this bracket, line it up, and let's start in one of the bolts. That way it's held in place, and if you noticed I actually put this nut on, that way it holds everything together while I'm installing the bracket. Get this close. Let's start in the other 2. There's the other one and the one up top. All right, let's get these nice and snug. And then I'll grab my longer ratchet and tighten them up. Okay, now I'm going to grab my larger ratchet and make them nice and tight. Just going to double check these, make sure they're nice and tight. Let's remove this nut and then we'll install the pulley. I'm holding the back side of the stud with a pry bar. Slide the pulley on. Let's grab one of the washers. Put that on. Now that the small washer's on, you want to put on this larger one, and then another small one, and lastly, the nut. I'm going to get this as close as I can by hand. It's stopping right there, but I know that that's not where it's supposed to be. It's most likely because that stud is not matched up with the slots that line up on that bracket, so I'm going to have to loosen it and somehow turn this stud a little bit so it can fall into those grooves. Okay, so you can see how the stud pokes through the nut. That's how you want it. If the stud is sucked in and does not come all the way through the nut, that means those 2 slots on the back are not lined up and the stud is not pulled through all the way, in which case you need to wiggle it around until you get it to pull through. At this point, let's put the belt on and then we can adjust the tension. I'm going to start up at the alternator. Make sure it's sitting on all of its grooves. Go down to the AC compressor and over to the harmonic balancer here. Again, make sure it's sitting where it's supposed to. I'm going to pull it down underneath the tensioner. Bring it back up over the alternator where it fell off of. Perfect. It's sitting where it's supposed to on all the pulleys and all the grooves. Now let's go apply some tension. Now from the top, let's apply tension. Again, 14 millimeter socket. I'm going to try and sneak it on there past that hose. And I'm going to loosen this nut, and that's actually going to push the tensioner down, push the nut up against this bracket, and eventually we will have enough tension for the belt. And once I get close, I'll actually explain how to measure the tension. If you don't know, it's a little trickier with these manual tensioners because if you over tighten it, then it'll ruin all of the bearings in your whatever the belt is driving. So in this case, the idler, or the tensioner pulley, AC, alternator, and all that. And if you under tighten it, well, the belt's just going to slip. And since it's a manual tensioner, you have to do it all yourself, and you have to get it, well, pretty close to perfect. I want to show you how to tell if it's tight enough. So you take the longest stretch of belt, flat belt, so in this case it's going to be between the AC and the harmonic balancer. Everything else has a shorter stretch. And you want to spin the belt 90 degrees. If it's easy to spin 90 degrees and past, like this one is, then it's too loose because it can just spin around freely. If you can only like twist it this much with minimal force, it's too tight. So basically what you're looking for is to easily turn it anywhere between 45 and 90 degrees, but not past 90. If you can spin it over like this with minimal force, again, it's way too loose. So I'm going to keep tightening just a little bit until I can spin it easily about this much, and then it stops. All right, so I adjusted a little more on the tensioner, and now I can easily spin the belt about, I would say, 65, 70 degrees, and then it stops. So that's perfect right there. And I'm going to double check the belt that it's seated on all the pulleys properly, which it is. If it's one tooth off, it's going to shred itself to pieces as soon as you turn on the car. And at this point, I can snug up this nut, make the tensioner nice and secure on there, and then we can reinstall the wheel. Let's reinstall the wheel. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts. We'll snug them up and torque them to 83 foot-pounds.